Good evening, everybody. First of all, thank you very much for all of the nice messages and sentiment I had after the short video I did about some personal stuff a few weeks ago. It was really cool to hear from people I haven't heard from for ages and get lots of nice support and encouragement, and a few people reaching out that I've been able to help a little bit and encourage. And obviously, that gives you the warm fuzzies, and being on the whole sobriety journey is super challenging and super cool. But yeah, so thank you very much. And there are people out there obviously who have been watching Mike and I doing this that I didn't even know we were even friends on Facebook or had any real following from. So that's really cool. Tonight, Mike and I are going to change it up a little bit and try and do something a little bit more, I wouldn't say lighthearted, because they're pretty serious subjects, particularly with the election going on at the moment and everything that's happening in the US and more over the world. But so we're going to talk a little bit about the TV series Billions, which Mike's just had to do a crash course running through, and I watched several years ago. It's a super, super cool series. So without further ado, I've got a sore throat tonight. It's been a long day, and I'm going to let Mike take over and just sort of give everyone a bit of a rundown about what Billions is, and then we're going to sort of get to where it came from, this super, super cool book, and then talk a little bit about some of the sort of more interesting anecdotal stuff from that book. So, Mikey, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, you might have to correct me on a couple of things, Shane, on the way through. The first one that comes to mind is I was going to say that it's about a guy who runs a large hedge fund company and insider trading cases, effectively. And it's sort of a, catch me if you can type setup where the district attorney and that's where I needed you to come in, like it's the district attorney of what New York district?
I don't actually know. I know from the book it's the Southern District, but maybe they were purposely remiss in mentioning which district. But yeah, I don't think that's too important. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, so this USDA is trying to catch this guy and build a case against him. And, there's a lot of intrigue and sort of, the fun of the show is in the various people's machinations trying to kind of, on the one hand, catch this guy, and on the other hand, not be caught and fight back against it. So, I mean, that's the sort of nub of the show. I don't really know what to say.
Yeah, so I just wanted to talk about it because I thought it was a super cool show in that it demonstrated, excuse me, the somewhat more nuanced reality of good and bad or black and white between, and that's what obviously so it's based on a book called Doing Justice by a guy called Preet Bharara. And Preet Bharara was the Southern District DA for a number of years and was actually the only Southern District DA to survive a regime change, administration change. Briefly before Trump, who had, like I said, had actually reappointed him, which was unprecedented, and then subsequently fired him within, I think, 3 or 4 months of his reappointment. So, but what I think it captures really, really well is the somewhat nuanced reality of who these people are behind these hedge funds, what their motivation is, but also the motivation and in some ways real similar mindset of the people that are out there, such as the DA and the criminal justice system, trying to put these guys away. So in the first season, it kind of sets the scene where Bobby Axelrod is the main hedge fund guy, and he is portrayed as, at first, on the face of it, a kind of money-hungry grifter who has all the sort of star power and pretense of a 21st century American hedge fund manager, the way they're portrayed. They do a fantastic job, and Damian Lewis does a fantastic job of being that guy. But as that first season goes on, I think they do an amazing job of creating a plot line to demonstrate that maybe the pursuit of capital and moving up in the social hierarchy, and actually in a capitalist society providing a vehicle, even though it is of course just moving money around, but providing jobs for people and encouraging them to have a positive life isn't all bad. And then it gets, I think, quite cleverly pitted against the internal thinking and motivations and personalities of, so in the case of Chuck Rhodes, is played by Paul Giamatti, played beautifully by him, and his wife is actually the shrink for Bobby Axelrod. So there's a cool little nexus there. And as it goes on, it becomes patently apparent that, the hedge fund guys aren't all evil. And also, by the same token, the Paul Giamatti's character is not whiter than white, and is willing to actually break the black letter of the law and do all kinds of kind of devious things in an attempt to bring about justice, which really begs the broader question: what is justice as a concept when it's applied in a day-to-day, real-life manner?
I thought it was interesting, like you may have mentioned to me, but saying it again now reminded me that the show's based on Doing Justice, the book. Because I thought that was somewhat of a contrast, was the book was reasonably, it went into some level of moral ambiguity, but it generally took a view of the world where the institutional element of the law, like the courts and the prosecutors and the rest, are broadly good and have noble intentions and are all acting in the pursuit of justice, and that there are people out there who are trying to subvert the rules and the norms of society and do things they shouldn't. And the show itself was much more shades of grey about that. Like, one thing that I just focused on in particular was there was a chapter where he sort of said he was critical of people who, in business, try and work out where the line is between lawful and unlawful behaviour and try and get as close to the line as they can. He really disagreed with that. He thought that even thinking in that manner was wrong, and that you should sort of be always striving to, operate in this very lily white kind of way. And it just reminded me of reading in fact, your shirt is relevant, I think, the guy who founded Nike, he put out a biography that a friend recommended me.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it was one of the.
Not that I'm a Nike fan. It just happened to be wearing a Nike. I like their gear, but that's an interesting character, Phil Knight.
I was going to say, I like, don't read a lot of biography to begin with, and I was recommended the Nike guy's biography by a friend who's a bit of a sports nut, and I really didn't want to read it, but he was a good friend, and so I thought I'll read it and humour him. And it was one of the better things I've ever read. It was really interesting. And I was just reminded of that because, when you're someone like the Nike guy and you're going from Phil Knight, right? You're going from, lower to middle class American to billionaire. By definition, you're heterodox. You're not part of the orthodoxy. You're someone who has to disrupt things to make all that money. And, the way that his established competitors used the regulations and used the regulatory bodies and the antitrust laws to try and hobble Nike and to try and bring it down in a way that certainly wasn't just when it was sort of starting to take off.
Yeah.
It was a reminder, A, that these things aren't always used for good reasons, but B, that business is ruthless and it's very competitive. And, particularly as that sort of hedge fund world, the portrayal of that shows, like when you're trying to beat the market by 30 odd percent often, like you can't do that if you're not taking reasonably significant risks and pushing things as close to the line as you can get away with. So I'll bounce that back to you, Shane, to see what you think.
I think there's a decided difference between very egregiously amoral behavior where the whole kind of raison d'etre or rationale for a business existing is to find where the precipice is in terms of the law and constantly live there. An example of that would be I acted for a guy and I very quickly decided I didn't want to act for him in the very early stages of lateral lawyers out of mum and dad's humble garage. The house wasn't humble, but the garage was, no disrespect to my father, the garage was pretty humble. And this guy was, one of these synthetic weed distributors. He had this fancy ute. He was about 22 and absolutely screeds of cash. And he would, turn up at my house and pay me in cash. And back when lawyers could deal in cash in the good old days. And this guy was telling me how, with great pride, how they every time that the government legislated to ban their drugs, they would just change the compound. Now that's an example of someone living on the edge of a law. But I don't agree that I agree with you, and I don't agree with some of the sentiments of Barara's saying there's this like to actually even go there, even in an occasional manner, is something which could be frowned on, because the absolute reality of business is that it's absolutely, like you said about the Nike story, the antitrust laws, it's absolutely ruthless. And if you're not, that's why lawyers, corporate lawyers, commercial lawyers, that's why we exist, is because we're actually paid to find out where that line is and what people can actually do in terms of the letter of the law. It's the same for everybody. I mean, with conveyancing transactions, we're asked constantly, like in terms of overseas investors, this person an overseas person, everyone wants to live here. Everyone, human nature, they're pushing it. They're pushing it all the time. It never gets old. Yeah.
I think that's true. Gosh, there's some other thing that I wanted to ask that sort of...
Yeah, no, I completely blanked as well. I had something to do with...
I'll say, just to fill the gap, that I was pleased that I read the book after watching Billions, because it was much more fun reading Preet and kind of imagining that maybe he was, a DA with a secret predilection for BDSM submission. If you recall that plot line.
I actually got my mother and father to watch Billions because I thought they'd quite enjoy it, and I forgot that the very first scene was when Chuck and Wendy were the BDSM instructor, and it was like a return to when you're 12 years old and watching something, and you with your parents, and a naked breast or something comes on the screen, and you go beetroot red because it's around the time you started to take like that. It was really it was awkward. I remember what I was going to talk about. I said a client a few years ago, and he was a real character, and he had some finance company, and it's starting to sound like we act like for a sort of hodgepodge of charlatans, but we don't. But this guy was a completely legitimate guy at a structured finance company. At one stage, he had FMA on his back about some regulatory issue. And it was really funny the way he described it. He said he had some guy ringing him up constantly about this issue. And he said that after a few phone calls, he said to the guy, mate, I don't want to be rude and I want to comply with your requests so I can get you off my back primarily. But you do realize that in much the same way that not dying is not the only purpose for living, not getting in trouble with you guys isn't my only reason for getting up in the morning. Like, it'd be nice to get you off my back, but sometimes it'd be quite good to get off the phone to you and actually go and make some money. And apparently that FMA guy had never sort of had it put that way before. And he said, I've been in this game for 17 years or whatever it was. I've never actually had someone explain it to me. Like, you guys, you've got a valid point. I'll try and be nice and efficient when I deal with you, mate. Yeah, and he reckons that from that point on, things went pretty well. And it's so true, right? It's the same with us, AML stuff, and like all this regulatory stuff. You've got to satisfy the authorities that you have enough systems and procedures in place, and that you are not asleep at the wheel in terms of the harms that the act is designed to proscribe. But at the same time, you've just got to get on and run your business, and that's for lawyers, accountants, for all of us. You can't just exist. And into wrapping that back into billions, I thought the way that they portrayed Bobby Axelrod and his deft kind of almost, how would you call it? His sort of, what's the word? He ran a kind of contemporaneous sort of approach where he was super hard on the offense in terms of opportunities, and he was ruthless, and he would break the law, and he would do stuff which was amoral and also just downright illegal. But at the same time, he always had this real focus on not getting in trouble and doing things right as well. The way he had a kind of almost narcissistically self-created morality that I found super, super interesting. And it's getting a little bit kind of pie in the sky, fugazi for goozy, but I thought it was cool how maybe one of the themes was that that's what's happened with capitalism, with democracy, and that's what's happened in Trump's America, is that people like him have become pin-ups for how people should be. And it's okay to do stuff like he did with the friend with cancer, because that was really kind of the ultimate height that you're trying to scale, is to have that kind of almost, how would you call it, sort of sire status in society. You've got money and you're good at this stuff, you're skillful, therefore everyone should listen to what you've got to say, and you're a role model.
Mm-hmm.
You know how they have the kids when they're all getting them through the program, and they're going to Harvard, and they have a little award ceremony, and little Thomas, who's the son of the guy who died in the 9/11 thing, and he's going off, and Bobby Axelrod's a big hero. And then in the background you have that juxtaposition where the wife of the guy that died is about to write the book, saying this guy's not all he appears to be. And I thought there was some real cool themes that they'd weaved in there.
Mm-hmm. Well, not to make this veer too much into English lit rather than law, but I've always enjoyed how Jackie Kennedy tried to resurrect the whole idea of Camelot around JFK's administration, because if you read Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur, like if you read the original Arthurian legend, the key thing that comes through is that what mattered in Camelot was not what people did, it was what everybody perceived them to do. So as by way of example, the sort of love triangle between Guinevere and Lancelot is treated as kind of a good thing and a reasonably lauded thing in some respects, precisely because it's all done in a seemly under wraps manner. And there's other stories in the book that you can contrast with that, where the actors involved are treated as really reprehensible, and it's because it's open and shamefaced and bald. And I think that's right. There's the sort of, like, I liked Axelrod. I thought it was another one of those good anti-hero shows where you're not maybe meant to like him, but he's definitely the most compelling character. And there is that disconnect between being seen to be certain things, like this beneficiary and, donating money to charities and all the rest of it, and then on the other hand, being utterly ruthless behind the scenes. I mean, that House of Cards, that Kevin Spacey show, is another good one like that. And I think it has there's a legal dimension to that too, which is that, there's this huge amount of regulation sort of designed to, make it more difficult for people to do bad things or things that are undesirable things. And, like Axelrod, some of the people that really want to break the law are going to be more assiduous than most in making sure all of those boxes are ticked. Like they never set a foot wrong on any of the minor stuff, so they can pass off the sort of bigger lie.
Since this is, I don't want to say the word deteriorated, because that was very highbrow stuff, Mike, and I really enjoyed it. But since we're sort of traversing all the different media, it makes me think too of the character X in, I'm trying to think of the name of the movie. Daniel Craig plays him, Layer Cake. It's probably one of my top all-time five top all-time favorite movies. It's a brilliant movie. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen that. I've always wanted to.
You
and
definitely
I don't know why
you haven't lived. That is a superb movie. Yeah.
Making a note to see that.
Yeah, you've got to see it. So the character X, he's got a great line in it. He's got two great lines in that movie. One is the key to being successful in business is being a good middleman, and he's a drug dealer. And it's again similar in some ways, some themes to Billions, in the sense that you've got the police which are after him. And then you've got all the different kind of chambers, so to speak, or compartments of the drug dealing cartel, and he's somewhere near the top, but not really at the top. And it's a super interesting line. He says quite near the beginning, he says, "Know and respect your enemy. And respect the law, because only very stupid people don't respect the law." And then they contrast him with this guy called the Duke, who's just an out and out, basically loose cannon. He's a munter, and he's like into all the drugs, personal use, and he's got this absolutely sort of rickety clan of destitute followers that sort of along with him. Ironically, Mike, they have the same car that our hero Dennis Reynolds and It's Always Sunny has, the Land Rover, and completely off the charts. And it sort of posits those two, like Daniel Craig, who plays this guy X, and his clan, who are pretty sophisticated, against these guys who are a real parody of people who don't really, they're in it kind of for the hustle, as opposed to this sector of society which sort of sees themselves as sophisticates, and they're going to break the law in a very kind of mafia way. There's code and all that, and you have to see what happens in the movie, but it's a super good movie as well.
It's funny in that kind of white collar context of sort of securities fraud and insider trading, because you're talking about guys who deal all the time in calculated risk, like that's their lives. And, you know, clearly there are certain regulations that there's no upside to breaking them. So why would you? Like, all you're going to get is a fine. And if you break them, you're not going to achieve anything. But then you see how many of them break the prohibition on insider trading, where there are significant gains to be made.
I've got a theory on that. I think within the same way within professional cycling, which I've always been, anyone that knows me and is watching now will have a real chuckle about this. I've always have been and still am a huge Lance Armstrong fan. I just find him an incredibly interesting person and someone I really looked up to. And I always knew he was cheating. That sport is very nuanced. It has 100 years of cheating. It's a 3,000 race in 3 weeks where they're riding 50k an hour. What do you think they're doing? Of course they're cheating. Jacques Anquetil in the 1950s said, you don't win his famous line was, he won 5 tours and was sort of a pop culture hero from the 50s. He said, you don't win the Tour de France on bread and water. Within that sport, it's kind of cool to cheat and take drugs. Not so much now, because the West got hold of the sport through Armstrong, then later Bradley Wiggins and Froome and all that. But I reckon through the hedge fund circuit, it's kind of a badge of honor for these guys to do this stuff. I know a few guys in that realm, and I know that is true. It's got a kind of almost cloak and dagger aspect to it, where they think this is actually pretty cool, and it becomes a competition of who can do the riskiest stuff in the most ostensibly legal way. So he's the biggest. Like, you know how they have Axelrod in Billions, and he's got Dollar Bill Stern, who's also just a fantastic character. And they have those meetings at warehouses where they're watching guys offloading certain things, and that means XYZ for the stock price. And then he has that famous line he always says to him. He goes, "How certain are you?" And he looks around.
I am not uncertain.
I am not uncertain.
I really like that.
Really cool. Yeah.
I thought I'm going to start using that with people. I am not uncertain.
I'm not uncertain.
Like, I wondered what that was about, whether it was sort of like how on, you know, I don't want to go into how I know this, but on forums on the internet where people discuss the effects of various drugs, everybody always goes on about like a friend or someone who is not me, which they abbreviate to swim. Swim wants to know XYZ. And I've always found that amusing because it's like, I don't think it really achieves for them what they might think it would. and equally, I can't see how, like, saying I am not uncertain. Like, I can see that what they're avoiding is ending up on a wiretap going, oh yeah, 100%, know it. And then the prosecutor being able to go, and how could he have known that 100%? Well, it's because he got a tip off about it. That sort of rephrasing it like that avoids that. Not sure how well it does and how much it's semantic, but I really like the line. But I was going to say,
I think it's quite a clever device that they use to try and show that that they are clever. And it's sort of to draw attention to the audience to earmark each particular spot where they've actually acted on inside information. The first time he did it, I didn't actually quite understand what he meant, and then when he did it again, I was like, "Oh, that's what this is the same, exactly the same comments of explaining it."
On your comment about culture, like that Axelrod sort of says it, he's only doing a thing that everybody does, and it made me think, like, it's a funny kind of thing in a way because there's not really any binary between publicly available information when it comes to companies and inside information. Like, everybody that buys and sells shares is acting on better or worse information, and at some point it must bleed into the territory that you're acting on information that is too close to the bone. But it's not 100% clear cut where that is. And that risk reward thing, when you're talking about the money that these people make out of some of these trades, like, is there any conceivable penalty? Is there any conceivable, penalty that you could be faced with that would prevent you from doing that if the risk of that penalty was reasonably low? I mean, particularly when you see in the case of these things in that Preet's book, like when he's talking about all the other sorts of crime, he's saying, oh yeah, and we got this person 6 years for that rape, or we got 8 years for that murder. And then you get to the financial guys and it's like, we really nailed that case and he got 34 months. You're like, oh, well, gee, that would certainly
even lighter than that. Like a lot, like the depiction with the guy who's is it Bill someone at the dinner, at the awards dinner, and they're all up clapping, and and they fuck him over, they tip him off, they know that something's about to go down, and they want to like get rid of him. But I was thinking about it, like he gets to, what do they call it? He gets to run a family office, which means that you go from managing gazillions and being the star, but your punishment is that you get to cop this, plea bargain, and you go and give them a bigger fish, but you still get to trade and make money, and you're still wealthy. So
keep the money.
It's not really the greatest deterrent, is it? Well, the worst thing that's going to happen to you is you're only going to make 10 million a year rather than 100 or 500 million a year. So this is your punishment for being a naughty boy, is you're no longer a star within the industry, but you're pretty damn comfortably off. That's not, and weaving that back into what you were saying about Preet's book. The moral of the story when I was when I was reading that really was, if you're going to get in trouble, you want to be sufficiently up the food chain where you have enough information on the top dogs so that you actually have something of value to give the prosecutors, so that they will cut a deal with you. So you basically get away relatively scot-free, as long as there's someone above you. Don't be that top dog in that particular realm. And obviously he does some quite good jockeying there around and he knows full well that that isn't necessarily, and that's what I was talking to more broadly at the beginning of the broadcast tonight, was, you know, it's not perfect, but what, as of yet, as a society, we haven't come up with a better way to actually administer justice, which doesn't rely on that kind of offsetting of the comparable or non-comparable, if you like, interest of the different perpetrators of the alleged crimes. It's a super interesting, and that's the first time I'd sort of had that read that explicitly in plain sight by someone at the coalface going, oh, they do make those calculations, you know?
I think it's a particularly American approach to justice too, the plea bargain. Like it happens elsewhere, but it's a big part of how their system functions. And I thought that was it was wonderfully American that in this book written by, you know, a reasonably pious member of the establishment in some respects, the takeaway message is even convicted of a crime and facing prosecution, you've got to have something to sell. This is America. If you don't have anything to sell, you're fucked. To excuse my French, but
did you like it too? How that they had that real tough guy, badass gang guy, and they couldn't get anywhere with him. Eventually, they brought him in like the full-on Italian meal
food.
that his mother, he was accustomed for his wife or mother had cooked him his whole life, and all of a sudden he softened and started giving them what they wanted because they got him a good feed.
I can get that. I mean, you know, some people are very good at keeping the long-term thing in mind, but I think a lot of people are maybe like me, where like short-term gain often outcompetes long-term gain, even when it shouldn't. And I can imagine,
under the pump. Yeah,
you know, being in prison for several weeks eating shitty food. I can just imagine if someone brought in something really nice to eat, I might start thinking, oh, hell, you know, this isn't going to go my way anyway. And it'd be really nice to just sit here and eat this right now. You know, it might not go well for me in a month's time or a year's time, but
I really like that.
I can see how it works.
Did you like some of the other anecdotes in there about, I love the one about the clothing store that kept getting robbed and they were in and out and they just took all their shit before the cops could turn up. So one of the staff had the ingenious idea of turning some of the every second coat hanger inverse so they couldn't quickly grab stuff in time. I don't know if I believe that, because to me, if someone was actually like industrious enough to break into your shop, surely they could just pull it all up at once. But I like the concept behind it.
Yeah, I sort of thought there was some creative license there. Like, I could believe the coat hanger thing, but I couldn't believe that the guys got caught because they allegedly, when confronted with this, said, oh, well, screw it, we'll just try and get each one off one at a time, and got caught in the act. Like, I feel like if I was about to do something and encountered a significant roadblock, I'd be like, I'm out of here. I'll rethink this. I'll come back later, you know.
I really liked the one as well. And when they're talking about how essentially businesses that have crossed the line and traversed into in areas where they're going to potentially attract the attention of prosecutors, and then for prosecutors to kind of turn around and start to be more creative and break away from orthodoxy and as to how they pursue these guys. And I love it how they hired that guy with a PhD and he was looking through all the suspicious transaction reports from in terms of that banks would file in terms of transactions. I love it how they realized that the parameters were real narrow and they were just picking up just boatloads of just garbage, and basically no one had actually bothered to turn their mind to what was really going on with, you know, and we had a situation like that last year. Well, actually, when the AML regulations first were deemed to apply to lawyers, we had a situation where I won't mention the firm, but it was a well-known firm, and we've dealt them with a few times. It wasn't one of the sort of celebrated bigger firms, but they were really they didn't have a trust account, and they were quite gung-ho about the fact that they weren't going to give us AML undertakings for this client who was going to pay directly into our trust account. And their position was that it's fine because the DIA's position is that a non-client doesn't require AML. And I was like, well, this is a freaking glaring gap in the legislation, isn't it? And then this guy was like, why do you say that? And I'm like, well, so everyone would just use you, wouldn't they, if they were dodgy? Because they don't. Then if you don't have a trust account, and then the vendor's lawyer, because we're acting for the vendor, doesn't need to AML non-clients, why wouldn't everyone just be paying us? I said, ultimately, with organizations like the institutions like the DIA, it's not your problem until it is. And you get these, you get these, responses whereby you try and get a guidance or clarification to cover your ass. And 9 times out of 10, you'll just get someone trotting out the legislation to you saying, XXX says XXS, it's a non-client. It's like, well, I'm not that comfortable with this. And that's sort of a similar type of thing, really. It's just like, you could just blindly follow the legislation and the guidance until some auditor comes across you and says, well, wait a minute, you just received, and it wasn't this much, I'm making it up, but $10 million from this person. Do you know anything about them? Oh, no, I don't. Oh, did you get an undertaking from the firm that acts for them? No, they wouldn't give me that, because originally they wouldn't. It's like, oh, okay, so you took $10 million 2 months after the government enacted legislation that applies to lawyers. The real bones of it is you need to sort of make reasonable attempt to figure out where this money came from. And you're telling me that because of the way it kind of fell in an applicable sense, you just blind it. So in the end, we just absolutely insisted on undertakings, and, for a start. But also, I just put all the stuff from DIA on my file. So what more humanly could we do than that at the time? And that's just another example of how, and that's what this Barrera was talking about, right? He was saying in the book that for so long, status quo can prevail until someone has enough ingenuity and industriousness to actually get off their ass and go, what is the whole point of all this data? Oh, it's to catch suspicious transactions. Oh, okay. So what's being done with it? Well, fuck all at the moment. Every time it comes through, they just click a few buttons and put it on this pile.
It was kind of 2 steps forward, 1 back, that they initially did it all, people doing it by hand, and then they digitized it all and had these shitty search parameters. And the guy that revolutionized it initially just went back to doing it by hand and was getting better results, and then updated the search parameters eventually and made it work as intended. But that point you made too about that's always an interesting one when you have to go to a regulator and you want to know what a somewhat vague provision or requirement means when there's not really any sort of precedent around it. And you'll inevitably get some email back along the lines of, we don't give legal advice. And it's like, no, well, I mean, fair enough, but it's not really legal advice. It's you've got these rules you expect people to follow, and they're poorly articulated or articulated in an ambiguous way. And we're meant to tell people what to do. And, it's very hard to do that when you don't know how that's going to be interpreted later. Where I guess that's where it becomes prudent to do as you did and go, what's the underlying purpose of this? Like, if an ambiguity in the law might allow us to do this, but it might go against us, and if it's the kind of thing that the regulator would probably disapprove of in a broad sense, it'd be a dangerous thing to hang your hat on.
Mm-hmm. And I think 100%. I 100% agree. And what it really is, it's about actually turning your mind to, say, in the particular case of what the particular bit of law was, the harm or the the end the harm was intended to prescribe, or the end it was designed to achieve. Another point. Oh yeah, and the other thing about that though that's interesting is processing technology is fantastic, and obviously it can be particularly fantastic for businesses attempting to scale and make their how do I put it? Make their whole funnel more efficient. But for lawyers, and that's why I often find that sometimes people who say, oh, for lawyers, like AI is coming and tech is taking over. It's taking over some of the more process-driven aspects of law firms. I completely agree. But I believe, and I don't know a lot about this stuff, but I've done some reading, and I've got friends who are real into it, and they have tech companies, and just I couldn't even, quote 0.1% of what they know about the area. But even their view is we're a long, long way from AI making the kind of decisions with the nuances we're talking about in shows like Billions or Pereira's book, Doing Justice. We're a long way from being able to actually see that tech implemented. And you know what? The human race, that's a good thing, right? Because once tech can make those decisions, think what other decisions they could be making.
Well, the scary thing is how they're making them as well as what they're making. Like most of these sophisticated computer models that can do these things are neural networks, and they're developed in a way whereby the sort of self-learning mechanism means that the ultimate process that you end up with, like even the people that design these things can't work out why it makes a decision that it makes. So if you have these things in control of any kind of determinative exercise, then there's no investigating or appealing the merits of what it did. It's just it did this thing and we don't know why, but we let it do it because it usually gets the right answer. And once you have those sort of systems deciding, the fear is that they get rolled out into all sorts of areas of human life, like processing credit applications, like that'd be an obvious.
Did you read any of that stuff about? I can't remember the name of the group. Was it from Oxford? Or was it the Oxford group, or about all that stuff around the US elections and how Trump's campaign was based around the use of that information and technology? Have you read much around that?
That Cambridge Analytica thing is that? Yeah, I mean, I don't know a lot about what they were doing or why it was particularly different.
If that had a particularly instructive hand, though, in that election, we could argue from a very high level conceptual point of view, if that's thrown up, say, Trump in power, and then the America we have today, that could be a good example of, I don't know what tech whatever they use, but just that way of manipulating and analyzing analytics to actually obtain an end, which of course in the competitive aspect of democracy has put in a party which by maybe but for the use of that kind of method wouldn't have put that person into power. You could actually far more intelligent people than me could piece that together in a articulate, orderly way, and with backed by research to show this is the way things are going, and that may not be a very good thing.
The one thing there is I question, like, whether the Cambridge Analytica thing, the novelty of quite what they were doing, in the sense that because there's a general institutional distaste for Donald Trump, there was a focus on it. But I would be
going on for a long, long time.
I'd be reasonably suspicious that both the Democrats and the Republicans utilize all sorts of data mining and information manipulation and everything else. That's an interesting thing feeding back into the book. Is it was refreshing to read it, because it kind of comes from a perspective in the profession that isn't probably my own one, and so it's nice to kind of meditate on it. But it made me sort of reflect on how law, unlike many professions, is quite divided in the sort of reasons people get into it and what they really think about what it is they're doing. Like, there's really two kind of camps. There's the, very idealistic justice and law, and it's all so wonderful, and the rule of law is so important, and it's up there on the shining hill, and everything institutional is great. And the friends I have like that are the kind of people who they aspire to be judges. If they worked in the criminal law, they'd want to be a prosecutor. And then you've kind of got this other camp that sort of see the institutional thing and the operation of the law as a sort of a tyranny almost, and your role within it is to try and evade it and fight it and help people to avoid the sort of worst excesses of it. And Preet's certainly very much in the former of those camps rather than the latter. Like, it's a somewhat separate distinction, but when, like, you may have seen this, Shane, like when I go to any kind of corporate law type soiree, everyone's usually pretty expensively dressed and well heeled and laid back and seem to be having a pretty good time, because it's all sort of, there's no ideological thing in it. It's just, I'm making money and that's what I want to do, and it's great. When you go to any kind of criminal defense lawyer type function, like, it's very noir. There's a lot of jaded looking people who, you can just imagine with their cigarette and black coffee, with a kind of like much more of an axe to grind about how the system treats people.
I think it's a real, definitely a trap for young players, but a lot of people obviously never find themselves, and we're getting off into completely different areas now. But Jordan Peterson, who's a controversial figure, but I like him, and I don't like some of the more controversial stuff that he says. I find it sort of, I think it obscures some of the better. And I read a real scathing review on him from a woman a while ago, saying that, at his best, he's just a reasonably good self-help author. And I said, well, how is that a bad thing? I think that that there is a super good market for that. He happens to be quite an entertainingly articulate self-help author. And a lot of people I know, myself, have actually benefited a lot from a lot of the stuff he's put out there. And we may have been, seen him in the first place. And the unfortunate way the world works is that, controversy attaches headlines, attaches this is this guy, he said this and did this, and that's unfortunate. But when you delve deeper, but one of the really good books he's written is called Maps of Meaning. And Maps of Meaning is a way where he didn't identify with any particular sect or group or social, class or anything right through his teens, 20s, had a hell of a time of it, also had addiction problems, and ended up writing this really, really interestingly complex book. And what it really is about is finding a way to have your own value system, so you're not going along to the criminal law faction and going, oh, these are my people. If I kind of do and say and look as they do, I'm okay in life. The corporates, we hate them because they're corporates, because we agree with we're sort of bound by principle and honor, and we don't want the money, blah, blah, blah. Then not to be also a corporate, bigwig or, cat going, the law is just an instrument and we're going to use it for gain and we don't care about that, and we'll do everything we can to show these kind of business people that don't have that working, knowledge of the law and intellect to break the law or be at the, precipice of breaking the law, and sort of to look down their nose. That kind of like dichotomy that they did so well in Billions between the lawyer acting for Axelrod, who used to be what's his name, the Connery guy, the deputy at the DA, Chuck's DA. That kind of dichotomy there, to weave that back in together, and it's about kind of realizing, like we said at the beginning of this show tonight, that no one's all good, no one's all bad, and just develop your own sense of what's important to you. You don't have to be associated with any particular clique or collective set of morals or principles. Just find what works for you in life. And I think if more people can do that, they can have a lot less pain, a lot less anxiety, because you're just you. That may put you in the commercial lawyer category, it may put you in the criminal lawyer category. As I've managed to do okay for myself and put my career back together and my practice grows, I'm constantly interacting with criminal lawyers and barristers and other corporate lawyers and business people, and I sort of got to the point where I don't have a real judgment on anyone for their particular choices or what they do, and no one's all good, no one's all bad. I don't hate anyone, I don't love anyone. I'm just sort of like going about my day, accepting everything the way that it is, and it's a way better. I used to have that till I'd go off to a corporate and think, oh, these guys are just. One of our clients is Manson's, like you turn up in your Toyota Corolla in the car park, probably worth less than one of Ted Manson's cufflinks, and you're going, oh God, I'm a loser, and and there's Bentleys everywhere. Then going off to the, like you said, like the ADLS, like drinks, and then people using words like they might speak a 15-word sentence. I understood 3 words in their sentence, and I'm out the back of the foyer with my phone googling what Svengali meant or something like that. So like it's just, in the end of the day, man, who cares? You just gotta get on with it.
No, that's right. I think it's easy to like, most people aren't binary, and it's very hard to have a it's usually wrong to have a binary view on anything. Like it's easy to see groups at kind of a macro level and think I mean, I don't know quite what I'm trying to say, but
I know what you're trying to say. Yeah. It's like not all is what it seems, and people just want to take sort of salvation or homage and whom they see as their people, and they'll say, this is me, and as long as I'm in with this crowd, I'm all good, and we do this, and we go to this golf course, and we drive this car, and we don't like these people because they stand for this. Like Richie, who Mike. Is that like he's talked about it too, like recently in some of his social media posts, saying things along the lines of he's very left, and obviously you and I aren't, but he's come to learn that not everyone on the left has got your best interest at heart. Not everyone on the left is necessarily all good, the same way that people on the right aren't all bad and just out for money hungry grifters, as I said earlier. So it's that nuance, which I think Billions depicts super well. And once you realize that, life becomes a lot less anxious and a lot more fluid, because you just realize we're all just here. We've been conditioned by shit way beyond our control, and we've just, at the end of the day, putting one foot in front of the other, trying to do the best we can and get a little bit of happiness from what, like, I get from my my Nespresso machine, but I've run out of pods. So
I think, as referencing Richie, one of the things, as you say, he is probably much more left than you or I, but he's very easy to get along with, even talking about issues that are very political, because the attitude he takes towards it, and the attitude I hope I take towards it and think you'd take towards it, is that you're looking for the things you can agree upon, and you're not seeking to rush to judgment about what people's motivations are if they hold belief about something that's different to your own. Like, it's often very easy to assume that if someone disagrees with you about the solution to a problem, they must be less invested than you are in trying to fix the problem or in diagnosing the problem.
His attitude brought to light, and him and I have had some good, healthy debates about various things. And hopefully until the day we die, we will continue to do so. But I think that one of the most important things came about, I don't know if you know much about it, but Casa Semenya is a female 800-meter runner, runs for South Africa. There's been a lot of controversy because she was born with internal testes, and she has now been banned from running in her chosen event in the Olympics.
Oh, okay.
She's been banned just because she has an elevated testosterone level, which the World Athletics Body deemed to be giving her an unnatural advantage. And some of the best journalism I've seen on it, I was an American guy, and it's one of the guys who's a regular in the Best American Sports Writing book, which is a really cool book that's produced like every Christmas time. And he talked about Caster Semenya, and he also talked about something to do with Serena Williams. I can't remember exactly what it was, but obviously there've been a few controversies around Serena Williams. And the opinion was that what we have actually lost, which has been of the most value historically, is the right for people to express themselves without judgment, and this vitriolic, cancel culture, hate culture, and it's just abhorrent. And if you think Caster Semenya shouldn't be able to run, which I do, in women's athletics, because her testosterone level is 3 or 5 or whatever it's times that of what we've come to understand a female to be, then that's just my opinion. I'm one dude out of a planet of billions and billions of people. Who cares what I think? If the guy down the road says no, she has every appearance of a woman, she identifies as a woman, and except for this physiological feature which she had no choice in, she should be able to compete in women's athletics, then I can respect that opinion. That's just your opinion. It's no better or worse than mine. It's an opinion. And we've lost the ability to be able to jostle and just put those opinions out there, with it being tantamount to be, I'm better than you, I'm more intelligent, I'm right because. And not being able to have that forum is hugely damaging on so many different social issues, because it means we can't actually do the one thing that ostensibly those discussions do, and that's actually have social interaction and some degree of consensus amongst the most people, so we have connection amongst people. So ultimately it just throws everything up if everyone just wants to freaking lynch each other as soon as everyone expresses any kind of difference of opinion.
It's a sad irony too, when the opportunity to have discussions about all manner of things socially is greater than it's ever been. And I mean, maybe that's why it's happening. Maybe before the internet, like when, the big platforms were all kind of institutionally sanctioned platforms, like maybe the world received kind of more of a uniformity of message, or the debates were conducted by people that were more professional. I don't know what it is, but it's certainly the case that since the sort of advent of the internet, just the polarization and the way that people kind of will go for each other about these issues is really quite incredible.
It's amazing too, though, what people will say and put forward from behind a keyboard. Various things I've had with work with people with emails, and you get them in a room, and one of the greatest strategies, and people, even though it is definitely the most efficacious or effective next move in a dispute, would not want to go and sit down with the other party when it actually could sort out the whole thing way quicker, way more cheaply, but people just have to man up and actually turn up and face up to the issue and actually have it out. And they often won't do it just because it makes them super uncomfortable, but they're quite happy to send these absolutely vitriolic, pumping emails from behind the thing, calling each other every name under the sun and thinking that they're bloody King Kong. And the minute you put them in a room, they're just limp-wristed and just, yeah. But anyway, it's we could probably bloody ruminate on that forever. So I think when it come up to the hour mark, it's much more fun talking about this stuff than about real law, Mike.
Yeah, it's definitely easier than kind of going on about a case for an hour.
But I'm sure we'll get back to basics and find the viewers something which is not just so self-indulgently fun for us in the next session next week. So thank you, mate. And I look forward to seeing you. We're catching up with it. I see he's active as always. He's probably our biggest fan, Sam McDonald, in the comments. Renowned former he's a former Labour candidate and now a Wellington barrister, but we'll be catching up with Smacks, as he's so fondly known amongst his how do I call it, his tribe. So that it's going to be a good. You and him will have I'm sure, a battery of exchanges over some of the more ideological underpinnings of your backgrounds, and I'll just sit in the middle as maybe I'll try and get an arbitrator's fee out of it.
Well, it's been a very good year for Labour, so I don't.
Max is no longer in the party.
You're not going to hear much defence from me, though, presently of my team. Not happy with them as it stands. But no, I'm looking forward to that, Shane. I can confirm that I've talked to Digby too, and who's another barrister friend, and yeah, we're all on board to do that Friday night. So
the show's on.
Great. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, buddy. See ya.